Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This, as Corey mentioned, this is our Accounting Leaders Roundtable, and we have some amazing accounting leaders here that I'll let introduce themselves. I'm Nick Tisconia, VP of Finance and Operations at Klarity. I've been with the company for about 3 years, and I met Andrew and Nishal, our co-founders, in 2019, and was really passionate about the problem they were trying to solve, automating document-centric workflows. And I transitioned out of my career as an accountant, which I'd been doing for 15 years, and am helping the company grow today. So really excited to be here with these amazing leaders to talk through generative AI and how it's impacting the function. So I'll hand it off to Sharon to give it a quick intro.
All right, thank you. So Sharon, Virag. I'm the Chief Accounting Officer of Genesys. I've been doing that role for about 2.5 years. Just recently also got named the Head of Operations for Genesys. Genesys is a cloud company. We specialize in contact center software here in the Bay Area and around the world. So about a pretty large software company, but we're privately owned, which you'll hear in some of my remarks. It gives both benefits and it gives a little bit of friction, but it has really helped us in this journey on how are we building out our accounting practice.
I'm Mike Dean. I'm the corporate controller of Amplitude. We're a product analytics company, and we went public in 2021. And I joined prior to going public as well, so I have some private thoughts, I have some public thoughts, and I'll share those as well.
Hey everybody, my name is Senad. I am the Chief Accounting Officer of Benchling. We are a SaaS company, vertical SaaS company. The majority of our customers are in the biotech and life sciences space. What we provide for them, you can think of as what NetSuite, Oracle, SAP are to accountants. That's what we believe we are to people who work in labs as primarily researchers in those life science and biotech companies. I'm super excited to be here and honored to be joined with the other panelists.
Awesome, thanks so much for the intros. It's great to have you all here. So the topic we'd really like to discuss today is economic uncertainty and practical implications of that, and of course how generative AI is transitioning how accountants are thinking about doing things on a day-to-day basis. So one kind of subtopic to that is external indicators. So what I'd love to hear from the panel is what inputs are you tracking externally from peers or sources outside of your company? And candidly, like with the wave of AI that's recently happening, like how are you thinking about taking those external indicators and thinking about your functions? Senad, you want to start us off?
I'll start very practical and very simple. I think that more so now than at any point in the past 10 years, except maybe the first 2 months of the COVID pandemic, it is super important to stay on top of the news and what's happening out there in the world. Case in point is what happened with the SVB bank. There was a period of maybe 24 to 48 hours where a professional could make a decision on whether to withdraw the money or keep the money with the bank. And I'm not here to say whether one decision or the other is better. That depends on your beliefs and your strategy and other things. But I feel that as a professional in our space, you have a responsibility to think about that and make a decision that you can live with long term. Currently, somewhat similarly, we have the debt ceiling debate. And I think there is a consensus out there that that's not going to have a significant impact on our company. It'll get resolved, figured out, whatever. And that's okay, but I still think as professionals, we need to stay on top of the developments related to that and think through all the possible outcomes that can come out of it, and then what do we do in each scenario so that whatever manifests as the outcome, we know what we are doing as a business and we can live with that long term and be okay with it. So I think staying on top of that is very important. How different teams do it depends on your structure and who you have. On our side, we have 2 people who are very, on my team on the accounting side, who are very in tune with developments out there and who have very keen interest in things outside of accounting, things like economics, investments, and other related fields. And we meet at least once per week to talk through what's going on out there and what our actions are going to be in response.
Well, yeah, on top of that, just the pulse of where things are changing even after news happens. Mm-hmm. So it's basically the SVB, you had those 24, 48 hours, but then, okay, a week from there, what decisions are we making? And then 2 weeks from there, it basically starts to shift over time, and you just need to make sure that you're staying on top of where's the conversation going.
Yeah, and I loved the part that you mentioned at the end of the question around using your network. I think networks right now are so important, way more than they used to be, in finding out and staying on top of like the pulse of really what's happening, what decisions is everyone making, how do I make sure that I'm both aligned and thinking with fresh, using our intelligence to really work through these things. But it's all happening so fast, right? And so the networks, I'm so grateful for 25 years of career so that I have that network built up now when we really need them.
Definitely. Yeah, I remember when SVB happened, we were actually at our offsite in Calistoga, and I was getting calls. We're not impacted at all, but it was interesting how everyone was moving fast. Vendors, customers, everyone wanted to know the information right away. So.
And I have to say, I loved that you guys put out your release. You were the first team that we received the email from, just stating like, this is not impacting us, and we were so grateful. But then it went, call all the rest of them. Like, we want everybody. I want to know from everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
So what are some of the processes that are changing based on how fast things are moving, or these different types of economic and macroeconomic situations or uncertainty? What processes change inside? I know you said you meet every week with a certain group of people. What else is changing within the organization based on these external factors?
I think that for a long time in the technology space, we were lucky to experience very high growth. And then because of that growth and because of, relatively speaking, low cost of capital, there was very little pressure on how we think about the bottom line. And so the main thing that is changing right now is that we are in the technology space. Technology in general is growing. A lot of our companies are still looking to grow continuously into the future. But we are now thinking, okay, how do we continue to grow the top line, but not grow the bottom line, keep it roughly the same so that we can reach profitability faster. And so there is a lot more pressure on us, which is probably healthy pressure and is going to pay dividends over the years to come. But there's a lot of pressure and focus on bottom line. And so how do we do the same thing faster, more efficiently, and how do we cut excess if there is excess that has built through our processes?
Yeah, prior to IPO and then through our IPO in 2021, I feel like we had zero conversations about profitability. And now every investor, that's what they want to know. How are you going to be profitable? And how's that going to happen? And then you have marching orders from the top of, well, that means that you have this expense in your org. And then how are you going to meet that budget?
Well, I would say for Genesys, we're lucky that we are part of a cost savings answer for our customers. And so we're seeing growth in this market, just as we did in COVID. We saw a lot of growth. We're related to customer service, and especially in a remote work. So from that standpoint, we have the revenue growth to support the G&A, but there's so much opportunity right now, nobody wants to hear that. What they want to hear is, how are you taking advantage of AI? How are you taking advantage of the other tools and automation that's available to drive down that cost structure? So I don't even know if I think they're related, the current, just passion around cost cutting and moving forward. I'm not sure I even relate it to the economic crisis. I think I relate it to the opportunity, and I think it's really an amazing time to have that opportunity to really be thinking about these new tools in a new way.
Awesome. I'd love to shift the topic to internal indicators. So, given all of these external factors that are happening internally at your companies, how do you even get started? How do you attack? Here's all of our processes, and which ones are we going to go after? Like, how does that change, and how do you attack this, this movement internally? Sharon, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that we were a private company, so we have lots of help from our equity sponsors. And so one of the things that they do is they lead a ton of work groups to share what tools people are using, how effective they are, which is actually super helpful, way more than you might expect it to be, because there's not really a lot of pressure, but they hand feed you, hey, here's what the tool that this person's using, here's the tool. We're doing the same thing for Klarity and showing what the tool is doing for us from an efficiency standpoint. So we're very lucky to have that. the challenge is the willingness of the organization to change, and so I know that that change element, getting your stakeholders to really buy into the need for it, I think is the challenging part, and that's where we're struggling just a little bit, but the opportunities are certainly out there, which I think is exciting.
Right.
For internal indicators, I like to ask 2 questions to my team, and Akeem's here, so he knows he's heard this a million times. But what do you hate doing about your job? And then what's incredibly repetitive about your job? And depending on the person, they might love the repetitive task, and so they don't hate it. They get to shut off their brain and do things. But you also answer the question of what's repetitive, and those are areas that we try to track and figure out, okay, how many hours can we save on that? What can we automate from those things? And do we have tools either in place already that we can leverage? Or do we need to go buy something else? Then how much would that cost, and is it worth it from an ROI perspective?
I think internally more so than ever before, the ordering of questions is very first, what are the things that we can cut? But second, what are the things that we can automate? And then only third, do we need to exponentially grow headcount and build additional processes? I think that 10, 20 years ago, you were maybe incentivized to think about growing in lower cost locations first. But now that you have all this boom with automation, you have to ask yourself first, what are the things that we can automate and create efficiencies that way?
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely interesting, about all of the change. We see this Sea Change, which is one of my favorite albums ever by Beck, by the way. little plug for him. So interesting to see how you all are thinking about that. And something, Mike, you said is, what do you hate to do? We heard something yesterday from one of our customers. It was like, do you love doing dishes every day? No, so build a dishwasher. Right? So it's this point in time where, hey, maybe it's time to build that dishwasher, right? So how do you operationalize this, right? Like, how are you building out the financial analysis, maybe like Tiger team, to say, like, what is the ROI on this? Or are you having each of the different teams on your, that lead your groups do it themselves? Like, how do you operationalize that?
Well, I'll start if you.
Sure.
I was just going to say, one of the fascinating things about Genesys is we've grown so fast, and this is the typical technology story. We grew so fast that our infrastructure couldn't keep up. And so in the absence of anything else, we have ROI because we have so many manual processes still. And I always think of it as, how is it that the tech companies seem to always have that problem? We should be ahead of the curve. But it does create a great opportunity for you because the ROI is easy to find, right? Replacing people with those automated solutions and things are really nice for us. And so telling the story of we're going to eliminate 50 people by implementing this tool, it's almost a given, right? And we do the ROI calculation, but it's actually a really easy conversation for us. I would hate to work and I have worked in these big, huge Fortune 50 companies where they're actually, in some cases, really well run, and it's hard to actually justify doing that. Fortunately, I don't have that problem today, so I'm very lucky, but it would be interesting to see how you guys do.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but you just need a centralized place for those ideas and actually measuring them against each other objectively. So maybe someone's super passionate that they hate some aspect of their job, but it's going to save 5 hours a month. It's like, well, that's not really going to have actual cost savings. And so for us, we bring them together and prioritize those in one centralized location.
I would add that when it comes to ROI, an important additional consideration is how much quality are you potentially giving up or gaining by automating something. And I actually think that generative AI is a game changer when it comes to that, because I've worked at companies of different size in terms of the customer count. So, and the way I think about it is, on the smaller scale, you have companies that have maybe about 1,000 customers, middle maybe about 10,000, and then high end maybe 100,000. And when you have 100,000 plus customers, a lot of your work on the accounting side is about understanding the big pool of data that comes across your desk, and then making sure that your financials in aggregate faithfully represent your results. You do not have time or ability to go one by one to every single contract of every single customer and be very detailed. And so automation there, pre-generative AI, everybody understood that that's what you needed to do, and you would get support to do it, and it totally made sense. If you go more to the side of a company that has about 1,000 customers and they are higher dollar, so several of them or many of them are individually material to your financials, pre-AI, I don't know that you had a lot of ideal opportunities to implement automation without fearing the impact to quality of your financials. But with AI, I think AI democratizes that process. And now, even though you're dealing with really sensitive accounting transactions, you can involve automation and get benefit from it because it's smarter. It comes from a different dimension. It's not just processing volume and making sure that the majority of things are correct. It has ability to help you think through the problems one by one.
Are you finding, one of the things that I'm finding really interesting is that as an accounting leader, I'm becoming much more knowledgeable about the importance of the data and how the data is really ruling us every day. And I'm almost ahead of the rest of the organization. So I'm finding that as I'm trying to demonstrate why we need these tools, I'm educating leaders that used to educate me on that. I'm now having to be the one who really understands what that means. And so the ROI becomes doubly painful. It's not just a financial calculation, but it's really explaining exactly what you just said and making sure that they really understand how that works.
I think the most interesting aspect of that is that there's so much to learn for us in this process, and that's why I think this is very transformational. It's going to change how we work and operate, and there's so much to learn.
Yeah, and we just did a skills assessment, skills of the future for our accounting organization, and it was fascinating how it's totally different skills. You have to understand the accounting, right? That's table stakes, but how you apply it is so different. And when you're thinking about what skills do my future organization need, it's all around data and all those tools that are really going to take us to next level, but get the accuracy, which is such a hard part of it. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, all three of you mentioned people, right, on your teams, and maybe needing 50% less and things like that. What are you hearing from your teams, and specifically like people that have a very specific skill set, right? And maybe now that's gonna change. Like, are you hearing positive things about adopting this type of technology? Are you hearing pushback? What's going on with your teams?
Well, I'll share that we just had that future skills discussion.
Right.
And that was enough to scare them all, right? Like, they were like, holy cow, is that really what you expect of us, right? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But I want that for them because I want them to be able to be in that future state and understanding those tools as opposed to fearing them, understanding how do I bring them in, how do I maximize them. That's going to be the skill set that's going to, it doesn't matter whether they work for me or they work for someone else, they're going to be set for that future. And I'm much more worried about the organizations that might not get that and are still thinking in terms of, keep my folks' head down, don't be teaching them about those future tools. I'd much rather have a really well-informed, well-trained workforce that can go and be in that world. And I'd say that to them totally openly and honestly. We have AI forums and we have all these discussions. I'm like, I have no idea what they're going to do with all this knowledge today, but it's really good, I think. And they're not fearing it. They're excited about it.
That's awesome, yeah. Developing your people for the future.
Right, exactly, yeah.
How about you guys?
I just echo that a lot.
Yeah.
So there's naturally a fear if you start to explain what's going to be automated, and it's like, well, that's 90% of my job.
Yeah.
So like, what am I doing then next? But no, it's educating about, well, there's the next stage of, yes, we get our basics done, but then you can be more efficient, you can help the organization in different ways, and you're reshaping their role. So it's not just ticking and tying anymore, but actually bringing business insight. And they are able to do that because they know the intricacies, the ins and outs. This is what the automated tool is supposed to be able to do. And so therefore, they can bring in a positive perspective while we put in automation and also looking to evaluate what comes out of it.
Yeah.
The idea that the robots will replace all of us is very unrealistic at this point. Maybe one day if they can think, feel, express, have the intuition and other characteristics like us or better than us, then maybe, but I think we're far away from that, unless if like Andre after this panel stops me in the hallway and says, hey, we actually have one ready.
This one's mad.
ready to go. But I think we're so far away from that. I think that any introduction of new technology poses a challenge because we have to adapt how we work, and we need to do that. That's the cost of coming better at the end of it. So there is a challenge, but there is so much opportunity as well. opportunity to learn, opportunity to improve, I think for our companies, for our society, for everyone.
My wife commented over the last couple of months that my cooking got way better, but it's just because I'm asking ChatGPT. What's in my fridge? Tell me what to cook. And
Add lemon
she's
juice.
like, wow. Awesome. So shifting, kind of pure to the automation. So we've talked a lot about, the indicators on how you're thinking about your processes and things. So how much impact are you expecting GenAI to have on your processes and your automation initiatives internally? Mike, you want to kick us off this time?
Yeah, I think that in the short term and the near term, right now it's mostly an efficiency tool, as was described earlier. So, okay, we need to make an accounting memo. Andrew obviously wasn't an accountant because he thinks we can make that in 30 minutes. I don't know, 30 days maybe, but no. So, but with that, you can at least get a template, you can get something in place, and you can start to build off that. It still takes a human to build off of the templates that you have in place. But I do see this getting to a place where maybe deal desk function, a lot of that gets automated, where we have standard, non-standard terms. Well, before it even goes out to the customer, we could have it build it just with an AE saying, I would like to add this term for this period at this price. And it could do that and send it out to the customer, and it would be okay. And so I see that happening for sure for us.
Yeah, I totally would agree. I mean, that's exactly the way that we're thinking of it is, we started in accounting, we started in revenue in particular, and then we can just see one of the reasons for moving me into that operations role is because we were able, the first two were using AI in a couple of different ways within our function. People are like, let's rip her out of accounting and go see what she can do in operations. So I think it's almost like once you feel it, once you know, like how do you train the AI and that you get a better feel for, and then the possibilities are almost endless, right? Which is why it's so exciting, yeah.
We're starting with revenue and tax primarily. And on the revenue side, our specific use case is we are more on that side of the smaller customer count, but larger dollar with big impact. And so we are able to leverage AI to help us do a read of a contract and help us understand whether there is something unorthodox in that contract, in addition to look for certain things that we would manually look for previously. And so we think that very soon we'll be able to rely on AI to do first level review for all contracts, and then for those that are smaller dollar and a little bit easier, full review. Yeah. Which will be a huge time saver for us, and it really de-risks our accounting as well.
Yeah. Speaking of risk, I mean, we're accountants, we're all very risk-averse people, right? So, how do you think about the risk of, bringing GenAI into these functions that are very critical from a financial reporting perspective?
I think Andrew hit on it earlier. It's really understanding the inputs and making sure that you're comfortable with that. Yeah. And then once you've set up the process, the inputs, and you're very comfortable that you've trained it, then it's going to be more consistent than a human. And so it's actually going to get better. And so for me, I see it more as we just need to make sure that we have the resources in place that can actually focus on a good adoption. And then once we do that, and we do that well, it should be even better and less risky.
100%, I would say, and I think that's the biggest learning that we've had in a year-long journey is put the time in up front to make sure that you're training the tool correctly, and then we dual processed. I don't even know how many times we've iterated through dual processing and UAT testing, and just to where we could get not just us comfortable, our board comfortable, our associates across the company comfortable. We're finally at a place where everybody agrees, and now it's no holds barred. Let's go and put this everywhere, right? Which I think is it's the way that you want to be, to take the time to get comfortable, so that you don't have people who are constantly stepping in your way because they're just so uncomfortable.
You refer to us as risk averse, but I ride BART every day, and I don't know. I think that disqualifies me from that category. But I agree with everything that you said. I would also add that I think the accountability and responsibility are very important. They were important prior to AI, and they're important with AI as well. We do not want to have a situation where people are saying, we have an error, let's say, and somebody who was responsible for implementing the piece of AI just says, oh, well, it was the system that gave the error. The ultimate responsibility resides with the head of a department or a head of a team, and they're enabled and entitled to implement the process, but also responsible that process is going to yield correct results every time. So we better be doing a sufficient amount of testing before we let something into production. And if we need a human control on top of the automated process, then we need to implement that, because automation gives us benefits on the P&L, but does not give us an excuse for error or imprecision or lowering the quality.
100% agree.
Yeah, makes complete sense. I guess one more, just kind of overall, how do you expect this type of technology to impact in the long term, right? We talked a lot about current processes and having it be kind of an assistant to what you're doing now. In the long term, what kind of revolution do you see in your functions based on this type of technology?
I mean, I'll start. For me, I like the just plain language and responsiveness to that. So you can ask a question, what's the trend in these geos for the last X periods? And if you're closed and you have the data set up appropriately, you should be able to get those answers. And so you don't need people researching it and trying to figure that out. So for me, that's what I'm hopeful in the future, is just being able to ask a question and based on the data set, be able to get examples or answers.
I just think it's going to get us smarter and better over time. I think that reading contracts, I find it very interesting. I like to do that, but I recognize that if there is a piece of technology that can do that automatically and can do it so reliably, then my job is to find something else that I should be doing. and that's good for me, right? Like, I'm going to be doing something new. I'm going to be doing something, I will learn something, and I'll try to make that better rather than making the process of reading contracts better. So I just think it's a positive. I think it's going to do a lot of good for us.
I have a vision of Senad on BART with a revenue contract. Yeah, I did this, but I'm going to read it anyway.
It's actually not far from what happens. It's not far.
So the only thing, I completely agree. I think the only thing that I would add is I am really excited about just watching the evolution of the technology. And as soon as I start to think of the art of the possible, it moves forward and I go, oh, I have to rethink my art of the possible. Like, this is so exciting. And so deciding where to jump in, I think, will almost be the biggest barrier to moving forward, because you almost want to wait. I want to wait 6 more months and see what, I want to wait 6 more months. And obviously we're not doing that. We're moving forward. But thinking about, and can I just ask it? Can I just ask it questions? Can I set it up so that I have a nice, clean source of data that I feel totally comfortable with asking those questions and just getting the answer? Sounds so fantastic, but do I want to wait for the next? I just keep going back and forth on that, and when do I go all in on it? But it's a matter of months as opposed to years, like it used to be. Maybe I'll wait 2 more years before I try robotics and let everybody else get the kinks out. You kind of feel like that here, but at the same time, I don't want to be the most expensive shop in town because I didn't take advantage of this, right?
Makes complete sense. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights. We'd love to open it up to the audience for any questions for our panel here. We have one over here.
Sharon, I'd love to hear more about the skills of the future. Particularly as we bring in more systems, more automation. You sort of have 3 tiers of people: the people who did the job originally, people who integrated it, and then the people who operate it. And what I always wonder about is, as you think about the team of the future, how do you get someone who's going to come in just to that third stage? They're just going to operate, green, this looks good. The system didn't throw up any errors. How do you think we maintain that critical engagement from knowing when something's gone wrong? In the system outside the system, and sort of keeping our core and our accounting skills fresh and.
One of the things that we did that I thought was super interesting was we took the headcount that we had today and we started the skills of the future by not cutting that down, just because we didn't want to not engage with everybody, right? So we just took those same people and we said, where will they be in the future? So we have the exact same thing. I have a technical group, I have an operational group, I have a systems group that is under my accounting umbrella, and we simply started moving them around to what we thought. And there's one poor lone person in the technical, right? And then we had so many people who were over now in and within that systems, and then we broke that down. But we still had a really hard core of monitoring people, and probably, if I'm honest, way more than I needed. But I didn't really want to talk about that. But everybody acknowledged that monitoring the output is going to be the more critical. And so then how do you break that into what are the skills that you're not in Excel creating it, so you can't be sure of it. You're in that black box feel, and how do I make sure that I understand the results and I'm monitoring it? Those are the skills. And it was really interesting. I had a battle with HR because HR was like, everything you're putting in there is soft skills. And I said, no. Like, imagine the art of the possible, I put down there as something you must do, right? The technology is moving so fast, you have to be able to see the future. You can't rest on today. And they were like, that's a soft skill. I'm like what? Like getting along with everybody and imagining the future are the same? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, no, you got this wrong. And so the whole thing was within that skill set of watching what is coming out, of monitoring the output, what is those skill sets of the future? And it was all about analytics and being able to build tools that rationally bring together those pieces, and then using our own brain. And I'll tell you, my own team said, can't we just put AI on that too? And I said, no, like that's where we draw the line, right? Yeah, that's where we have to say our minds have to be better, and we have to rely on that and go heavy on it if we want to be comfortable in an AI world, which is, you know, kind of our fundamental belief at Genesys, is that as long as we outline for what is the human capability that can never be repeated by the machine, and we protect it vigilantly, we can get comfortable with AI all over the place. But that's the piece that we really talked about from a skills perspective. What is that piece that you keep sacred?
We've talked about the inputs and outputs of the models. All these AI models are built on the data. What are the questions or challenges you're facing to restructure your own company's data so these AI tools can actually leverage and improve and add those efficiencies?
I think it was brought up a little bit earlier as well with the last session, but actually being able to connect them and connect the transactions. So maybe if you have batch processing, you lose that level of granularity, and being able to know that you have unique identifiers or items that you can actually connect that information all the way back up the stream is what we've been thinking about a lot. Because if you're going to evaluate the complete end of the process, you need to understand how it transacted all the way through and be able to follow that. That's at least how we're seeing it.
I would say AI brought out far more around our data problems than we ever understood, for sure. We're using the tool to also help us identify where those are, which has been really helpful, reconciling for us at a detail level we just weren't able to get to before. We didn't intend it to do that for us, but we realized it was necessary. And so I think you have to think of it in two ways of how do I create efficiency, and then how do I find my own problems, and is there a method, or is there a usefulness in the tool or in that tool set that can do both of those for you? And then be patient. That's the big thing that I keep telling everybody when we talk about our journey, is teaching the tool, finding your problems, fixing your problem, teaching the tool. That process, you have to have so much patience. It's not a quick thing. And if you bring the patience to it, it can do amazing things. And when you get to the end of it, we were so proud when we've gotten to the end and we've seen the accuracy we're looking for. But I can tell you along that journey, there were so many times we were like, this is all pretend, like this is not real. And then we realized, no, the problem is really, as you have said exactly, the problem is in our own data, and exactly. It's just not the magic bullet that you want it to be, because it highlights for you sometimes those things. You have to just come into it with the resource, the patience, the time to actually address those things as you go along, little piece at a time.
And along those lines, like maybe you've set up a process that loses some of that granularity. So like in our CPQ, we put discounts sometimes also with reallocation of bundling. Well, then you lose all of the detailed information to make those decisions. And so you need to look at each path and what the questions that you're trying to answer, and do we have that granularity of data, and what in our process is broken, and where are we losing that?
were you able to rebuild the CPQ?
We're in the process.
Yeah. That's interesting. We have to talk. Now we have to talk.
That question is so interesting because I think if you think 10, 20 years ago, and if you thought that offshoring or using lower cost locations to hire additional workforce, if that was the solution, the ideal way to do that was to organize your process to be as efficient as possible, as easy to understand as possible, and easy to transfer to a new place as possible, so that you can involve people in new locations into that process relatively easily. I think with AI, depending on which piece of AI you're using and what you're using it for, I think the question is that you should ask yourself is, one, do I need to first perfect the process before I bring AI to automate a part of that process? Or do I not even worry about that, and do I just bring AI and start a new process, or bring AI in the convoluted, non-ideal process, and maybe AI makes it more efficient? I think you have to go through that decision tree. So when it comes to something like reading contracts, for example, I don't think it is super critical. I don't think you're going to run into so many problems of like, hey, where is my data? I think that you're going to figure that out relatively straightforward, and you're going to be able to start quickly. But if you're doing something with AI where you're transitioning data from one system into another, then I think you have to ask yourself, do I have the right system in the front end, the back end, and do I have to change that first before I introduce the AI component into the story?
That's it's a great point, and I'll just give you one quick example. Is we had the problems, very similar actually, of reading contracts, and we read the largest contracts, and from reading the largest contracts we knew that for doing 606 revenue recognition, we weren't capturing all the information in our system that we needed to get revenue recognition correct. And when we were only looking at the largest contracts, and we were only making sure that the data was right on those largest contracts, the volume of contracts that weren't being looked at was too large and was material. We were throwing off material errors. And so we had to solve that problem. And so everybody was like, find a solution in an automated way. But the truth was, we didn't even capture all of the data problems until we put in a solution that manually went through all of our contracts, manually reconciled what is the missing data and how do I get that into my accounting system. And then once we finally got to that, and we did it manually, we did it with a 25-person shared service center that checks data. We did it with a 25-person revenue reading, contract reading center that we have that is looking at every single contract. Then we were able to go to the AI solution and say, okay, we have our hands around the problem. We understand all of the issues that we have down there. We know what the missing pieces are. We can train the AI to go grab those pieces and insert it here. And we had to really get all the way to the bottom of the barrel of monkeys, was how I always described it, because we never knew what all the problems were in there until we put in the manual process and really understood it like this. And then you were able to, okay, now I can move it, as opposed to you just don't know. You don't have enough without that.
Thank you, Earl. And I think today we heard a lot about the non-standard revenue contract, and I'm sure all of us are using Klarity, the greatest product of doing that. And I'm interested into learning any other specific use cases you guys might share in accounting or procurement side, and what, if any bonus point of what the pinpoint or is actually a success story. Any specific tool will be helpful as well. Thank you.
Well, I'll just start. So we use AI in our product. So in order to create customer experiences that have an empathetic experience for customers, we have that. So within Genesys, we use some of we call it Genesys on Genesys, right? We use some of our Genesys tools, and including trying to use some of the AI tools that are important for our customers around how we link our relationships within what are the parent relationships, and the AI actually keeps a lot of that straight for us. It happens to be a component of our total tool set. We use it even though we're not using it in that customer service center way. We use a lot of those tools, but those are the only tools. We use Klarity, and then we use our own tools for AI.
For us, it's Klarity primarily. We have a tax use case where we are using where we're using AI to basically do the initial preparation of some of the work papers that rely on the consistent sources of data on a regular basis. But that's the extent to today.
I don't even know if it qualifies as AI, but like NetSuite has cache application where you can, it learns basically based on what's in the wire or ACHs. You can say, oh, it's this customer and matching the invoice, where we've historically had a lot of manual intervention for that we're using that now. But we're very early in our journey as well.
So I was just thinking when you're talking about use cases that if you are able to do all of this groundwork, then, because there's a lot of time for those that are public companies that in earnings prep, where you could sit there and if you could have all this information at your fingertips, because you've set it up properly, ask it any question, or even better, have it go through all the data, point out
What your narrative should be for this earning.
The not so nice things to talk about, so you can preempt what's your response. So that's like, that would be the holy grail.
Write my 10Q
Absolutely.
and my script.
No, but like
we and responses Q&A, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of time spent. A deck that's for CEO and CFO, producing that deck with all the data you possibly could think about.
Yep.
If AI
Yeah.
could just generate that automatically and even point out where you should be looking that you might miss otherwise, that would be
Yeah.
That's
amazing.
huge.
And then in order to do that, you do everything that you're all talking about.
Again, it's about setting up the data.
Yes,
Just setting up
exactly.
our lead to cache, is where we're really focused on putting the tools now. And so we would have to go like a little outside of that and get into record to report and all of that, which is what we think is the next horizon. Yeah.
All right, well, I want to thank our panelists so much. This was an amazing conversation, so thanks for joining
Thank
us
you.
and giving your insights.